Hey, welcome to another episode of DOCasts. In this episode, we're going to go over the basic user management and some things that you should know should you start to manage servers, especially if you're going to have a group of people that are going to be managing these same servers. You're going to want each of those users or those people to have their own user accounts. So in this video, let's go ahead and cover that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my VirtualBox Ubuntu installation. That way you can go ahead and you can see what it would look like if we used a GUI or a graphical user interface of how you would go ahead and manage users and things like that. That way we can transition into the command line and you could put two and two together so you'd have a better mental visualization of what is going on. So let me go ahead and jump into VirtualBox. As you can see, I have my user accounts settings up and running, and I only have one user here, and that's the administrator. That's myself, John. All right, so this is not root. This is John as the user, so I'm not using root. I'm using my own account. But you can see here in terminal on Ubuntu that I'm using root here to go ahead and edit through the command line. And it's really easy to actually use root. And to get to root, let me go ahead and I'll exit out of this. That way it brings me back to John as the user. And if I just go ahead and use sudo s, that will one prompt me for my password for John, but then it'll bring me into the root account so that I can go ahead and edit things as root on this installation of Ubuntu. Now keep in mind when you're a root user, if you don't already know, and I may be preaching to the choir here, but make sure that anything you do as a root user, you're definite and you're sure about doing, because once you start editing things as a root user, and as a user that has sudo privileges or super user privileges, it's very hard to recover the things that you lose if you accidentally remove something as a root user. But anyways, let's move on. So as a root user, I can go ahead and begin adding user accounts to the system. Now, if you have any experience with using Ubuntu or even another operating system, they usually have a graphical interface like this. It's really simple to use. If I unlock it here and just enter in my password here, I'll be able to start editing and adding users as I wish to. So you can see here that I am an administrator. I can change my login password if I wanted to, whether I wanted to log in automatically and whatnot. All right, so what you could do is add a user account here. It could be a standard or administrator, and you just enter in the full name of the person. Maybe it's Jack Smith, and that would go ahead and generate a username for you. Maybe I don't want this username. Maybe I just want Jack, and then I could go ahead and I can just click on add. And what that would do is add Jack Smith with the username Jack to my users area, in which I could go ahead and now, instead of having it account as disabled, I could enable it, give them a password and whatnot. So if I wanted to, I could set a password, and I can use this to generate a password. I'll just go ahead and I'll copy it and I'll paste it in here so I don't have to go ahead and type that out. But then we have Jack Smith. If I use this password here, I could log in as Jack Smith on my operating system now. So that's pretty easy. That's pretty cool. Well, it's just as easy to do this within the terminal. It's not visually as appealing, but it is definitely just as easy. Now, if I wanted to see Jack Smith information, I would come to user's account and I could take a look at what's here, right? But what if I'm on the command line or a terminal, I don't have access to the graphical user interface? Well, what I can do now is I can use the password file. So if I actually just get the tail end of the password file, and that's etc password, that should give me Jack Smith and John. So these are the two users that I can be on, that I can log into via Ubuntu during the startup process. So we have John and we have Jack Smith. As you can see, we have the full name for Jack Smith here, the first name for John here. If I wanted to, I could go ahead and go into here and I could put John Smith as well, and that would spelling issues right here. John Smith as well. That would go ahead and update as soon as I click on enter. So if I press the up key and then press enter, we should now have John Smith. So that is the first name, last name for John Smith, and again Jack Smith, and this changes again using the GUI interface. Alright, so now that you see that we have John Smith and Jack Smith, we can see the users available using the passwords file. what we can now do is, using the graphical interface, we can remove Jack Smith, and look, it's asking if we want to keep the home directory. Now, a home directory is created when a user is created so that the user can store his or her files in that home directory for that account. Now, we have the option to go ahead and delete the files, or we have the option to keep the files. And this is pretty common through the major operating systems as well. Of course, Ubuntu carries this feature, but I'll go ahead and I'll just delete the files, and what that would do is remove Jack Smith's home directory from the home directory folder. So what I'll do is I'll just click on delete files, and that removes it from the system. If I go ahead and click on up, I'll be able to pull up this file. But the home directory for Jack, if you could see it in this file, is home/Jack. So if we went there, after Jack logged in, if we went there, we would see Jack's files if we were the root user for Jack himself. All right, so with that said, we have the home directory, and then we have the shell program that is being used by this user. And you can specify this when you're creating the user through terminal. All right, so I'll go ahead and click on enter, and you'll see that Jack is no longer existing within this file. We just have John Smith here. All right, so let me go ahead and clear up the terminal. Let's get started with creating users using terminal. Now, to add a new user, you could use the user add command, or you could use the add user command. Now, these are very similar. They do pretty much the same thing. They both add a user to the system, but one is a little bit more visually appealing than the other. So for add user, that's definitely a little bit more visually appealing, and you'll see the difference right now. So let me go ahead and use the user add command first, right? And again, if you wanted to read the manual files for it, just type in man right before user add. But we'll type in user add, and then we'll put Jack again here. So Jack will be added to the system. Now, if I take a look at the tail end of the etc file, the password file, we'll see that Jack, the user himself, has been created. And if we look in the user accounts area, Jack is now here. And we can go ahead and begin to edit things within his account using the user mod command. But before I start doing that, let's check out what the add user command is. And let's just say we're going to use this for Jacob. All right, so Jacob here, we're going to add the user, and now you can see that, hey, the system did add the user. It added it to the group Jacob, and this is pretty much default on most systems unless you go ahead and change the default settings. It goes ahead and assigns that user to a new group with the same username. Now, again, you can change this. And then we have the add user Jacob within the group Jacob, so that just basically created that association for you. And then we created the home directory in home/Jacob for you. Great. Now we're also copying the files from the skeleton here. And now what we want to do is enter in a password for it. So you notice that user add Jack didn't ask for a password for Jack. What you actually have to do is use the password command and go in there and set the password for him. All right, so, but for add user, it's asking for the password up front. Now, granted, we don't have to set one, or we can try not to. And what it will do is actually ask you for one anyways, because that's just something that is a best practice. So we'll just add a simple one here, and I'll go ahead and enter that in twice. Hopefully I entered that in successfully. Yep, great. Now see, you can see here that the password command was used, and that's passwd, and that is the command that you type in for add user if you didn't set a password for that user. But then we have the full name. Let's go ahead and use Jacob Smith. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant to put Jacob Smith on one line, but I guess I pressed enter too quick. Then you can enter a room number if you wish to. You don't have to. A work number or work phone number you can enter in as well. And I'll just enter in something random. That way you can see the difference of what this looks like within the password file. I'm not going to add an other. And yes, this information is correct. Don't be scared to enter this information. You can edit this information in the future. So if you mess up, don't worry about it. Like, for instance, I forgot to add Smith as Jacob's last name, but no problem. But what we can do now is we can take a look at the tail end of the password file. And now we should see not only Jack with its minimal amount of information here, but we can see Jacob. And that, if we take a look in the user account area, we have a password set up. So unlike Jack, which the account is disabled, Jacob here has a password that he can log into. He is a standard account, and everything looks pretty good. I mean, we got some information for Jack here. We got the home directory created. Let's see if it created the home directory for us, and what we can do is we can list where we are. Okay, so I'll go ahead and I'll list the home directory, and we have Jacob and John. So you notice that when we created Jack here, a home directory wasn't actually created for Jack, but it was created for Jacob. So that's pretty good. And if we went ahead and we deleted Jacob from the system, we could choose whether or not we wanted to remove those directory files. So if I just unlock this real quick and I'll show you what that looks like. If I authenticate it, and then this is what it asks for if we want to delete the home directory. And I'll just cancel out of that because I don't want to actually delete these from the GUI just yet. I want to do it from the terminal. All right, so again, we have Jacob, John, and Jack within the system. Now, there's actually two commands to delete users from the system, and that is user delete, and of course, just like the other one, we have delete user. So you can switch those two around, and I mean, you got two different commands for pretty much the same thing, but again, one is more visually appealing than the other. So if we went delete user and we use that on, let's say we use it on Jack this time, that is actually more visually appealing. It's removing the user, then warning group, Jack has no more members, done. All right, great. So if we look at the user accounts, Jack is no longer there. We just have Jacob and John Smith. Now, if I wanted to delete Jacob here, of course, a home directory was created. And in this example, don't want to keep the home directory. So I'll actually run a recursive command with it, or a recursive parameter. So what I'll do is I'll type in user deletes R. That's for recursive. That'll remove the home directory here that you see. And then what I'll do is I'll put in the username for that user, and then I'll go ahead and I'll press enter. Jacob mail spool not found. No worries. The command was still run, so you don't have to worry about that. Now, if I go ahead and I see what's in the home directory using the ls home command, I should just see John, and of course I do. It's because it deleted not only the user, but the home directory. So that's pretty useful if you want to save space on your operating system and whatnot. Now, remember how I said one is more visually appealing than the other, but the other one that's not as visually appealing is actually pretty powerful. So for the case of user add, there's actually some pretty powerful parameters that we could add to this command to make sure that it gets applied to our user. Now, the first one is comment. That's -C. And you could enter in a comment for the user account here. And then what you would do is you just put that in quotes, and then you would add the username right after that. And what that would do is it will add a comment to the user account. So if I just click on enter and we take a look at the tail end of that password file, let me go back up right there. We'll see that this is the comment for the user account, and it not only commented but created a user with that username. And again, we can see that within here. Then we have comment user account. So for this case, it applied it for the name of that account. Now what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and I'll use user delete, and I'll recursively delete username, and that'll just remove it for me. All right, so the home directory in the spool wasn't found. Don't worry about that. That's because we didn't create one for that user. Now, a couple of other ones that are pretty useful. Let's say maybe you are managing a team and you have someone on probation or something and you're giving them temporary access, or maybe you have a project manager that you're giving temporary access to your server, or a developer you're giving temporary access. You can actually set an expire date for that account. And to do that, you would just use the -E. So you would use user add -E. Sorry, typo on that one. -E. Then you would type in the year in 4 characters. So year, then you would have the month, and then the day. So again, you can see how the format would be. And so if I actually type that out, let me go ahead and delete that. If I wanted to, I could put the year, this 2014, and the month, maybe we're setting it for November, and it'll be the 1st, right? So you make sure you follow that format, and of course then you would add the username here. So if we went ahead and just clicked on enter, and we looked at the tail end of it, it wouldn't be within the password file. What you would actually do is you'd run this command here, and what that would allow you to do is pass the username, so in this case it's username, and press enter. So as you can see, the account expires on November 1st, 2014, and that is the date that we set previously. So pretty cool. You could set some powerful things using the user add command. Now there's a few other things that you can pass with it, and I'll just go over them really quick here. User-D, if you submit the information here, would tell the system to save the supplied information as the default settings for any new accounts that are going to be created after this. So you could use that. That's a powerful command, especially if you're setting up a bunch of user accounts. Then you could also use the -s command to set the shell that's going to be used. So typically that's stored within the bin folder, maybe something like ZSH or something like that, or bash or something like that. You could go ahead and set that manually, or you just leave it as default, which would be bash, I believe. And you can actually change what is the default within a file known as the login default. So if you go ahead and let me remove this. So if you go to vim etc login and then defs for the defaults. So as you can see, this is a file in which some of the default values for new accounts comes from. And I actually don't recommend editing this file unless you know exactly what you're doing. But this is just something that's good to know and keep in mind. For example, we have the pass max days. That's a maximum number of days a password may be used. The minimum days, number of days allowed between password changes, and things like that. So we also have the max retries and login retries, login timeout. All this can be set here. Login timeouts, seconds, and things like that. So what you can do is you can edit the information here on the file, or you can use some of the commands via command line, and you can actually see some of the user defaults if you just type in user add and you take a look at defaults. Now remember, I said that some of the default settings can be changed if you create a new user with the -D. In this case, you can also see what some of the defaults are for the user add file if you just type in user add-d. You can see things like the home directory, where the default is for that, default shell, it's the skeleton, where the skeleton is located at, the mail spool. By default, this is set to no, and you can change these settings using some of the parameters that are set after this, but I won't go into that in this video. If you guys would like me to cover some of that in a future video, please do let me know. Just for the context of this video, we're just going to go over the user add user, delete user, and user delete commands. I'll also briefly cover the user mod commands in case you need to change some of the user details. But that's pretty much it for adding and deleting users. Let's jump into an actual droplet situation to take a look at what this actually looks like. Alright, so I've logged in again to my droplet. I'm logged in as the root user, so I haven't created any user accounts just yet. And to verify that, I'll just take the tail end of my password file, and that is located there, and you can see that I don't have any users located within this file. And if you wanted to see this file, just keep in mind that you could use cat instead. That will show the entire file for you, the password file, and you can see everything from the root user down to what is created after this. So for this example, we're going to use the add user just because it's a little more visually appealing. And it's going to go ahead and create that home directory for me. What I do is I'll add user and I'll add Jack here. And this will ask me for Jack's new password. I'll type that in for him. And then I'll go ahead and I'll put Jack Smith, just like we did on the actual desktop installation of Ubuntu. And I'll enter some random phone numbers in here. And I'll just go ahead and click on enter through that. I won't set them all. But then if I take a look at the tail end of the password file again, we'll see that Jack Smith has now been entered into the system. If I take a look, if I go change directory, up one directory, and I take a look at the home directory, we should see a new directory for Jack. So great, the user Jack has been created. He has his own home directory. If I log out using exit or log out, and then I just click on up and type in Jack here, that allow me to log in as Jack. Of course, I will have to enter a new password because I didn't set up the SSH keys. But I can see I can log in as Jack, and now I can start using the system. So where am I, first of all? Well, I'm within my home directory for Jack. So great, that's awesome. But now if I wanted to, because I didn't set up a password for my root user and I'm actually using SSH keys, it won't let me authenticate to root. I'll actually have to exit or log out, and I'll just demonstrate the logout command here, and I'll log into root. All right, so now what we can do is demonstrate the user add on a droplet itself. So we have Jack there, and let's put Jacob within the system as well. So we got user add Jacob, and then we'll add Jacob in there. All right, so what we need to do next is we need to set a password for Jacob, and what we'll do is put password Jacob. It'll ask us for the password. I'll enter the password in, of course, and then what we'll do now is, because we didn't create a home directory for Jacob, we can use the user mod Jacob, and we'll set the home directory for Jacob to home, and we'll set it to something else, maybe JJ instead of Jacob. Great. Now if we take a look at the home directory, and we'll do that by just using the ls command, we should see that one hasn't yet been created. All right, let's take a look to see if it works. So we'll exit out, and then we'll log into Jacob here. It'll be prompted with the password, of course, and we see that we don't actually have a home directory because one hasn't been created. All right, so as you can see, we have a very minimal description on the left hand side. What we need to do is go back out, so we exit this and we'll go back into the root user, and what we need to do is create a home directory for Jacob. And you'll notice that things are a lot more manual and hands-on using the user add. But what we'll do is we'll go into the home directory, we'll change directory into home. All right, we'll take a look at what's there. Let's make a directory for Jacob, which is make directory Jacob. Take a look at the password file. So if we go tail end of the etc password, we should see that a shell program is not specified for Jacob. So that's why we're seeing a very minimalistic terminal view when we log into Jacob. Let's go ahead and set that now using the user mod command. So we got user mod, and then we're going to set the shell using the -h, and we're going to set it to /bin bash. Great. Oops. And I forgot one more thing, that we actually have to mention Jacob in the user mod. All right, so now it's set to bash. If we take a look at the tail end of the file, we'll see that, hey, we have bash set up there. And actually what I should do is change it to bin bash. If we go into Jacob's account, we should see something a little bit more. Great, we have Jacob at user management, and now if we use the ls command, we could go ahead and we can see everything is going well. So let me go ahead and exit out of Jacob's and back into root so we can manage these users. Watching this video, you've seen a taste of user mod, you've seen a taste of user add, user delete, and the opposites, which are add user and delete user. Now the latter two, again, are the more visually appealing, while the first three aren't as visually appealing, but they're definitely powerful commands to know, which do very similar things. So I hope this video helps. If you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. And if you have any requests on future episodes, definitely create a user account and then leave me some feedback within the feedback area. I'd love to hear from you guys, and I'd love to hear what you guys would like covered. All right, so have a great rest of the day, and thank you for watching this episode of DOCasts.